What would you do if someone you knew or cared about was showing signs of overdosing on some kind of opioid, like heroin or fentanyl? Some who use heroin or its derivatives may balk at calling for medical assistance, believing that this will expose them for using illegal substances and placing them in jeopardy of arrest. But this is not the case, as Bennington County State's Attorney Erica Marthage explains.
So currently the law in Vermont, the immunity law, is written so that if you call for either yourself or someone that you know that is overdosing, you cannot be prosecuted for a drug possession or consuming drugs. The state's intent was to make sure that we can get people to call when they or a loved one or a friend are overdosing. The immunity law was not widely published at the time it was written. Now that overdoses have become more and more in the public eye and have been on the rise, at least in this county, we have not charged anyone for calling 911. If it's ever a choice between some type of criminal case and saving someone's life, we're always going to opt for making that call and making sure that you can try to save that person's life.
Are there any, would they be in a situation that they might have to testify about who sold them the drugs in the first place?
That's always an issue. We do look in some of the cases, particularly in any overdose case where ultimately there is a fatality or a death, we do look to try and find the person that provided the drugs. So it is a possibility. Does it happen often? No.
Vermont has had a so-called Good Samaritan law in its books since 2013. People who call 911 for help in overdosing situations are protected from being charged for drug possession. According to a recent news article in the Burlington Free Press, less than 40% of the people who requested naloxone, sometimes referred to as Narcan, and used to reverse the effects of drug overdoses, reported calling 911. Ken Sigsbury of Turning Point in Bennington discussed why the law is not better understood and what someone should do if a friend or family member is showing signs of distress.
You can call the authorities because the authorities, as far as addiction, have always been an issue. People don't call the authorities. They're afraid of getting in trouble. Even though people are saying things like, it's okay, you won't go to jail if you do this. If you're associated with someone using illicit drugs, you won't go to jail. They have a difficult time believing it, number one. Number two, they just don't know it and understand it. That's what our responsibility is as an organization in Bennington County to make them aware that if they do help somebody, they're totally protected and they can't be prosecuted in any way. Yes, call 911 immediately. Because of the Good Samaritan law, you're not going to be prosecuted in any way. If you do have Narcan or know someone that's close by that has Narcan, then get them Narcan as quickly as possible. You will only have a short period of time, especially if the person is unconscious, to bring them back. There's only so long that they cannot, receive oxygen to their brain before they die. So,
what exactly happens when you overdose on opioids? Time can be a critical factor. Dr. Trey Dobson of the Southwestern Vermont Medical Center explains.
So if we're talking about opioid overdose, it is a respiratory situation. In your brainstem, you have inherent drive to breathe. So if you are asleep, you still breathe because this is not a voluntary response, but an involuntary response to breathe. And opioids block those receptors in the brainstem and cause your respiratory rate to slow to the point where you don't breathe. When you don't breathe, you don't get oxygen to the brain. You don't get oxygen to the brain, your body shuts down. But in general, it's minutes we're talking about. And when your respiratory drive stops and you're not breathing, death is imminent if it's not reversed or someone's not breathing for you.
Dr. Dobson had some additional advice on what to do while you're waiting for professional help to arrive.
So what we advise the public is to start cardiopulmonary resuscitation, which is CPR, and that involves compressions on the chest, and in general, you need another person present to do the mouth-to-mouth portion. So we used to say you give compressions, 10 compressions, and then 2 mouth breaths, but we found that doesn't work very well. We just focus on compressions. So you may say, well, if they're not breathing, don't we need to breathe for them? If you have two people present, yes, one person can breathe into their mouth, the other person can do compressions on the chest. But when you compress on the chest, you're circulating blood. You're trying to get blood that has oxygen to the brain, and that's the most important part. So Narcan is the brand name for naloxone, and it's known as an opioid reversal. What it does is it goes to the brainstem and it displaces the opioid that has been on the brainstem. Once it displaces that kicks in your normal respiratory drive, and it works really fast. We're talking about within a few seconds to a few minutes, depending on the person's situation. And it just kicks your own body in to start breathing again. Medications that used to be available only in hospitals, and then it was available by prescription, but now it's available over the counter, no questions asked. Depends on your location. Sometimes there are age requirements, but we're really trying to just make it universally available. But it turns out that the half-life of naloxone, of Narcan, is not as long as some of the opioids that are being used. So even though you may start breathing again and you seem fine, 15, 20 minutes later, you drift back in, even if no more opioids are ingested or injected. It doesn't mean that everyone needs to carry around naloxone, but it does mean that those at risk, family members in homes where they know people are using opioids, and even workplaces where they know or suspect that people may be using opioids, should have naloxone available and should be prepared to use it. It's very easy to use. It's as simple as using an EpiPen. A lot of people know what EpiPens are for. They carry them around in case they get stung by a bee or have some other type of allergic reaction. And it's the same with naloxone. It's easy to administer, whether it's a spray or an injectable, and again, it's very efficacious.
For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.